Hi everyone, and welcome to Interactive Futures and our session called Why There's a Career in Games for Everyone, even if you don't like maths or science. We feel this is a really important topic to cover at the conference because we realise that there are definitely perceptions of the games industry, and some of those perceptions might be that people don't necessarily think there's a role for them, or maybe that games isn't a place for them, or perhaps would they fit in. We also want to cover whether games offers a career and perhaps a proper job. I know that some parents may have that concern. So today we're going to face up to some of those perceptions and in many cases those misconceptions. We're going to talk about what the games industry has to offer. We want to leave you all knowing the reality about the breadth of the careers in games, the potential for a long-term and successful career in the industry, what it's like to work in games, why you'd be welcomed, and how to get in, even if you don't like maths or science. So let's get to it. If you have any questions, please do pop them into the Q&A tab on Hoover, and they'll come through to the panel in about half an hour. So first, introductions. My name's Liz Prince. I'm the business manager of Amicus. We're a specialist recruitment company for the games industry. I've been in recruitment since the early 90s, previously worked in IT, and then before that I was a computer science grad. I've worked in games for about 16 years now, and I'm deeply committed to diversity and inclusion across the sector, working particularly to help inspire women and girls to consider the career paths available, with the ultimate goal of achieving a truly diverse workforce. I'm also a proud ambassador for Special Effect, a charity which uses video games and technology to enhance the quality of life for people with disabilities. So let's introduce our panel. Sol, you're on my left.
I'm Sol Aweso. I'm talent acquisition specialist at Sega Hardlight. I've been in the industry for about 5 years now, all of it in gaming as a recruiter. And yeah, we're based in Leamington Spa, mobile developer, and a few other things.
Oh, amazing. I'm sure we'll learn more about you as we go. Charlotte.
Hi Liz, so I'm Charlotte Pook. I'm the talent acquisition specialist at Electric Square. We have three studios, so we've got Brighton, Leamington Spa and Singapore. I've actually been working in games for just a year now, but I have done recruitment for about 4.5 years. Prior to that, I was a veterinary nurse, and prior to that, I did an acting degree. So I'm kind of the poster child for a strange way into the games industry for you today.
Perfect, thank you. Tiffany.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Wild. I'm a gameplay programmer at Ubisoft Leamington. We also have another studio called Reflections in Newcastle. I've been doing gameplay programming for about 6 years, a little over 6 years now. My path into games is quite classic, actually. I did a computer science degree, and then straight out of uni, I just applied to a lot of studios. Codemasters in Birmingham gave me a chance, and a few years later, I just moved over to Ubisoft.
Wonderful, thank you. Pete. Another co-master.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'm Pete Johnson. I'm talent acquisition specialist, such a mouthful, for Codemasters, and I've been here now just over 12 months. Been in recruitment for over a decade, so a very long time. But yeah, as I say, only in games for the last kind of 12 months or so. Codemasters, we've got a number of studios across the UK, including Cheshire, Birmingham, and our headquarters at Southam. And of course, we also have Slightly Mad Studios, which always operated on a remote-only basis.
Perfect. And finally, Alex.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
So I feel bad because I've been in the industry for a really long time, as it seems. So I've worked in games for almost 20 years. Currently, I'm a studio art director for Mediatonic, art directing this tiny indie title, Fall Guys. Before that, I've worked in a plethora and a different number of studios around the world, in London, in Germany, in Spain. So from AAA to mobile games, I've done it all. And yeah, I hope to add an interesting flavor to this group.
We've definitely got some fantastic views that we're going to be able to share. It's brilliant. So guys, I wanted to try and start out by looking at what perhaps maybe some of these general perceptions of a career in games. So who do you imagine that people will think that the industry is suited to? The sort of perception of who would fit in. Alex, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I feel that the perception is changing, but it's also somehow stuck. And the stucking part is this, I don't know, this South Park image of the nerd just sitting in mom's basement and just being very isolated from society. And I want to say this is not true. There might be some peak examples out there, but the general rule from what I can see in Mediatonic or any other modern studio is far from that. So it is indeed a very social, a very nice, and very kind environment to work in. So just to take away all the negative preconceptions. I guess you have those bad examples in every field of work, but I can tell from my own experience, it might have been like that 20 years ago when I started, but it changed drastically.
I think that's a really interesting point, though, isn't it? That the industry has transformed in so many ways, actually, over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Have you, Charlotte, Sol, Pete, Tiffany, have you ever had a misconception about your role, something that perhaps people thought? Who wants to jump in? You're unmuted. Oh, there you go, Charlotte.
I think a misconception is that you have to have a lot of education behind you, if you have to have a degree to get into games. Obviously, if that's your preference and you'd like to do that, fantastic. There are lots of internships and apprenticeship schemes you can do via universities, but also there's so many other routes in. And I think that was a misconception that I personally had when joining, obviously, the games industry and looking at the different things you need for each role. You don't necessarily need to come from a university background if that's not exactly what your path will be. However, you can. And I think that's probably the biggest one for me, actually.
Cool. So, Pete, you said that you've been in recruitment for quite some time. Did you have any perception of what it might be like to work in games before you joined the industry?
Yeah, I suppose so. But I've been a lifelong kind of gamer since 6, 7, something like that, when I drove my parents mad. So I always had kind of this kind of image. I think what Alex was saying, I think the stereotypical kind of nerd geek, that's one that has been leveled at the games industry for so long. But having worked now for over a year within the environment and just the different kind of backgrounds and personalities within our studios and just the industry in general, when I'm speaking to people out there, it's far from it. It's far from the truth. So like Charlotte was saying, yes, we get a lot of graduates, and the competition, make no mistake, the competition is very high, the bar is very high, but also people who get involved with personal projects. So in the spare time, maybe game jams, things like that, that's really opened my eyes, in terms of, it's not just who's got the best grades, it's also the person who can demonstrate, their C++ programming skills, or, can demonstrate their art stations. And they're amazing. I look at them in awe, and I don't know how they do what they do, but it has really kind of opened my eyes to being a lot more out there.
So, Tiffany, I know you're a gamer. Can you imagine why perhaps some girls might be put off a career in games from your perspective?
Well, yeah, especially as a programmer, there's a lot of stigma. When I started, I finally got into games. I've always, since 14-year-old, I've wanted to do games. The first reaction when I told my parents, I want to do games, is like, yeah. Kind of like, that's not a job, really. That was the first misconception I had to face, was like, well, games aren't a job. And through that 15 years ago, I had no idea how to even get into games. I was like, well, I'm going to do computer science because I want to do games programming. I was lucky enough that I knew what I wanted to do. And then I finally got into games, I finally broke into games. And then every time I told people, right, Brody, I'm a games developer. I'm like, oh, amazing. Are you an artist? I'm like, I'm a programmer. And so first off, the idea of having a female programmer was just not conceivable in anybody's mind. the first reaction to people was always, "Oh, you're an artist." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"No, you know, because female programmer, they're just such a rare sight in the industry. So there's that stigma specifically for programming, but even broader, you know, I think historically at the beginning, games were very early on marketed for boys, and there's still a lot of stigmas in society about game being for boys. I mean, one of the examples I have is typically we had that console called the Game Boy. It was not called the Game Kid, it was called the Game Boy. So there's that stigma still that games are for boys.
Yeah.
So naturally, more gamer tend to be boys. That's not true today. We know statistically today that it's about 50-50 in terms of players, but there are still that stigma. People think, despite the statistics, that most gamers, if somebody is a young girl, they might not think, well, games aren't for me. And if they even think that, if they think that it can't even play games, why would they think about developing games? Because the other stigma we have is that a lot of people think that unless you're a really hardcore gamer, that you can't make games, which is also untrue. There are plenty of roles that you can thrive in as a game developer, even if you're not a hardcore gamer playing 5 hours a day.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point to get across. So before we leave our sort of perceptions, perhaps, of the industry, did anyone try to put you off going into games? Any misconceptions before you joined?
Yeah, my mum was one of them. So it's a classic case of, you know, games isn't a career. It's been mentioned in this. I went to university and did languages and tourism business, and I was always had it drilled into me that I'd, you know, work in the UN as like an interpreter or something like that. And it wasn't the case. Like coming into games, when I told like friends and stuff that I were doing that, they were like, well, what, you just gonna like design games, be stuck in a basement and stuff like that? And it's not the case, you know. That's the view of what people think it is. And it's not the case. It's a lot more to that. It is playing games and having fun, but you know, it's a huge business now.
It was kind of the thing to me as well that my parents were, but they were not against me doing games, but they were very worried about it. Once because, yes, as Sol just said, they didn't think game was a real job, and also they didn't see that games had a job stability. They were worried that if I do one game, even if I enter in games, I might do a couple games and then company goes under, and what do I do? I'm left without a job. Where do I go if I fail? They were very worried about the idea that if I don't succeed in 2 games or I get laid off, what do I do after that? They also thought it was kind of, I think they view it as unskilled. They didn't think that games could be a very, you know, they didn't see how difficult sometimes it can be to make games. You know, it is challenging. Games are definitely a challenge. It requires a lot of creativity, a lot of talent.
That's that's not a word I've ever associated with the games industry as unskilled. I think it's probably one of the most skilled and sort of creative and technological industries that I've ever come across, actually. I think just sort of picking up on this point, I just wanted to spend a minute here kind of talking about the real job, real career piece, and maybe to share just a couple of stats. I think it's everyone can see really that games is an industry that's seen enormous growth over the past 20 years. In the UK alone, last year, British consumers spent over £4 billion on video games. And globally, it's a market that's getting on to be almost twice as big as the film industry. In the UK, there's over 1,000 development studios. And I think what's really interesting and quite important for careers is that it's also one of the most distributed sectors. So people are based all over the country rather than everything being headquartered in London. So it offers real sort of regional opportunities, much more than other industries. We grew in the UK by over 14% in the past year, and obviously against a backdrop of the pandemic and economic decline. I think it really shows how resilient the sector is. So to Tiffany's point there, you know, what would I do? With the new technology launches, worldwide connectivity improving, And all the time, there are just new markets and consumers opening up for games year on year. So I think it kind of may be a dream come true for someone who's passionate about creativity to get a job in games, but it's also a genuine profession and a financially rewarding career for life. So I wanted to turn to kind of how it feels to work in games. I think some of you have already touched on perhaps what it's not in terms of those perceptions. But I wanted just to get a sense of what it feels like working in games and how you describe the work that's done. So Alex, coming back to you, what's it like to work in games?
Terrible, run. No, just kidding.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off now.
No. Really, just kidding. Maybe just quickly adding to your prior point. I come from a Latino background, and to my parents, anything that's not a career to become a doctor or a lawyer is not a real job. So it's okay. It's totally okay to pursue your passion. So when it comes to games, I gotta say, every day I feel extremely privileged because I get to work in an environment where most of the people are extremely passionate, and extremely thankful to work in their field. And this is something I hardly find in other job fields, to be honest. I did some internships in some other non-games related fields, and I was always like astonished how people made this strong separation between their work life and their private life, and something that I wasn't used to when working in games. It kind of like blurs into your personal life in the best way possible, because what unites us is the love for games, the love for how can we achieve certain things in a game, how can we make games look cool, what is the smartest, most elegant way to program something, sound design, how can we make this a reality from a production standpoint. There's so many pieces that have to fit together, and everybody really works together, I don't know, compared to like a really well-working soccer team, for example, everybody pursuing this goal with this strong momentum. And I gotta say, this passion and energy is what keeps me alive, what makes me turn on the computer now. It's not going into the office anymore, it's just turning on the computer. But yeah, I love it. The energy is very good.
Yeah, that's amazing. Tiffany, as a programmer, is this just a tech job then in games?
Absolutely not. Actually, the one reason I enjoy programming so much is because it's actually a creative job. It's a creative job as much as art or design. My role as a gameplay programmer is that I'm finding creative and elegant ways to build massive game system that will hold the entire gameplay, the rules and the mechanics of the world together. So I actually have to think outside the box most of the time. How am I going to implement this in a way that's sustainable for the future as well? So no, it's like solving a puzzle every time. I often associate programming as being a detective. I have little tools at my disposal and I have to find clues in the code. How do I do this? How do I do that? When I track a bug, I'm literally looking at a crime scene almost. And I like to do it that way because suddenly it makes it sound a lot more fun and a lot more approachable than you're just writing lines of code. Because at the end of the day, writing the code is actually the end point, the easiest part of the programmer role. The core of the role is really problem solving.
Nice. I really, yeah. And I've got some really fantastic recruiters here. So Sol, Charlotte, Pete, when you're selling your roles in the games industry and studios to potential candidates, tell us each a couple of words. How do you describe working in games? Charlotte?
Yeah, so I'm, like I said, I completely echo Alex in the sense that a lot of my colleagues are very privileged, very creative, very passionate people. And I think, when I speak to someone who's speaking to me for the first time about Electric Square, I think that's, our culture, our feel, our things that we pride ourselves in, the things that are important to us, diversity, inclusion, well-being, community support, obviously our social responsibilities. These are the things that I feel are most important to us. And then obviously the technical sides of things and, you know, the develop talk can come after. But I think when we're talking about us as Electric Square, we really like people to know who we are, who we're formed of, how awesome our colleagues are, and how passionate and creative we have. You know, we have an amazing team. We're so lucky. And I think that's what people are really interested in first, if I'm honest.
No, that's amazing. Anything, Sal or Pete, just to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think both the guys have touched on, well, everyone's touched on that actually, like collaboration's a huge thing. So it's like Charlotte was saying, it's not just, oh, you know, I'm Pete, I'm calling from Codemasters. Everyone knows us. We've been going for 35 years. There's none of that. You know, it's almost kind of that comes later, like Charlotte was saying. It's kind of, you know, tell me a bit about yourself. You know, do you have questions for me first, you know, in terms of how we do things, you know, and how we operate and kind of the team dynamics. So, and going back to kind of what you're saying about perception, for me, you know, I thought I was going to be coming in. I came from the finance world where it was so, yeah, you had to work a certain way. I'm being very, PG here. I couldn't be any different since coming to video games. You know, you have really diverse characters. You have some really kind of outgoing, but you also have some really introverted people. But even, you know, everyone is just so kind of approachable in their own way. They're all working together for the same goal. It's great just being kind of part of the, you know, the weekly meetings. Because you just hear these guys, you know, like Tiffany and Alex, the guys who are actually in the dev teams, you know, telling us what they're thinking of doing or what they are doing next. And my mind's blown, you know, especially when I'm looking at kind of coding tests and things and how they make things happen. So yeah, 100% kind of, you know, the diversity, the collaboration. It doesn't matter, you know, where you come from or what, you know, what your views are. We're looking for everybody, you know.
It's a home for you.
Yeah, to knit into that family.
Yes, definitely.
Same to me, really. The industry is really a place where I feel like I belong. I don't think I could work in many other industry. I could be a programmer anywhere in theory, but I wouldn't want to, because the games industry especially, I just feel like I can be myself in all of my quirky ways, if you want, because I'm not the most standardized person by my look, by my hobbies. I can get stigmatized quite often. And I feel like in games, people embrace who I am and they celebrate who I am. And we celebrate the individual and the differences between the individual.
Tiffany, while we're talking just about your role, I think there are definitely, thinking about the topic, there are definitely some roles where people will need a maths or a science background. So let's look at those just for a minute so that we can look at the other roles as well. So tell us what you think about the roles that need maths and science.
Well, they'll mostly be on the technical side. You might need a little bit, if there's any designer here who wants to contradict me, by any means, please do so in the Q&A section. In design, you might encounter some light mathematics with probabilities. You know, when you have to think about the difficulty curve for the game, that might require a little bit of light mathematics to make this happen, calculate the difficulty of the game. But beyond that, it's mostly going to be in the programming area, but not all of programming. You can be a successful game programmer, even if you're not a math genius, and that's really important. For me as a gameplay programmer, I might use a little bit of vectorial math every now and then, but beyond that, I use very little. The roles that are very science and math heavy, if you want, are going to be physics programming. As the name suggests, it's about building the physics and the simulation of the world. Yeah. So you will need to know about how gravity works, how transfer of power works, especially through, I'm sure Pete can attest, in racing games, for example, when you have to be as close to the simulation as possible. When I was on Formula One, the physics is very, very precise. You'd also encounter maths in rendering, so graphics programming rendering. So it's about displaying what's on the screen, but you have to make it really efficient to the performance. So that will require calculating what's in your field of view, for example, which calls for geometry and a little bit of mathematics. And finally, AI. AI will use interpolation, it will use also vectorial calculation, it will use probabilities to kind of calculate what's the next step in the behavior. But beyond that, tools programming, gameplay programming, even generalist, because as a generalist programmer, you'll kind of delve in all of the little areas. You'll do a bit of physics, a bit of AI, bits of tools, but you're never going to be an expert in all of them. So it's also quite a good point to kind of test the waters and see how much you know and what you enjoy.
Okay. No, I think that's brilliant, because what we really want to spend probably the rest of our time looking at is those other roles then. So somebody isn't perhaps going to be an AI programmer for the rest of their days. So let's talk about the other perhaps non-technical roles that might be of interest to people watching. Sol, tell us some of the roles that you think.
So it's sort of like any other business. You know, you have HR, marketing, you have recruitment, a few of us are from, you have art, and like it's already been mentioned, design. There's loads of, I guess, roles that you can have which don't need maths. There's IT, like dev security sort of stuff that might not need as much.
So we definitely need those people perhaps who are thinking, I was just thinking about Charlotte's background. Okay, you studied, how did you become a veterinary nurse? Was it, Charlotte?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a strange path that I took. So originally I did an acting degree and then realized this is actually quite a tricky industry to get into. I also did it straight out of school, and they tell you can do anything you like, and it's true. But I did realize I didn't quite have the drive, if I'm honest. So I realized, you know, my second passion is helping people, helping animals. So I kind of went into that. I did a BTEC in animal care. And I strangely kind of fell into more of the reception side after doing the nursing for a little bit. And then I realized, actually, I really like working with people. And I started working with child protection, which led me on to sort of the admin side of work. And then I started working with care recruitment and then automotive recruitment, which is completely different. And while I was working in recruitment, I just thought, you know, I love speaking to people from all walks of life. I love helping people get the career that they want to do. This is amazing. However, these aren't industries that I'm hugely passionate about, automotive, if I'm honest. And I thought, how can I apply my, you know, love for games? And I am lucky, I do have a passion for games. So I obviously, you know, reached out to the team at Electric Square, and I was fortunate enough to meet Guy, who did take me under his wing, and we did have a position for me down the line. And I think it's introducing yourself to those people, even if there's not a job at the time. We always take speculative applications. And I think it's, you know, understanding where you might want to be eventually. It's not always obviously straightforward, as I'm kind of telling you, but you do find your way. It doesn't have to happen straight away. If you're not too sure yet on what you want to do, the games industry is a great place to give you different opportunities, even if you start in a certain role.
Guys, we've had a couple of questions that are really relevant to this area. And Alex, I think you might enjoy this one. What would an artist's day-to-day life include?
Well, I think we got to narrow it down if we're talking 2D, 3D artists.
I haven't got any more detail, Alex.
All right, let's try and make this as general as possible.
Yes.
So an artist's life at Mediatonic is a very social life, because we have to cater to the designs that we get from game design. We have to come up with characters, backgrounds, UI, UX, really everything that's needed to not only to make a game look pretty, but also to make a game that's ergonomic, that's easy to use, that works on all different kinds of platforms. So basically, when it comes down to what I look for when people apply to Mediatonic or general for an artist role, it's not your technical abilities or how well you manage your craft. This is all very important too, but it comes down to one important point, and this is empathy. It's how's your ability to think, what would the players like? To think, okay, what is the person holding a controller wanting to see? And this is kind of like the most important part. And when it comes down to the day-to-day life, usually we start our days with stand-ups, when we talk about what needs to be done for the next couple of weeks, maybe also doing some planning. We call it milestone planning. There's also some time to get some extra work done. I try to keep artists outside of meetings as much as I can, to be honest. And basically, the way it works within the company is that we have a kind of artists that's more on the managerial side, like managing people, schedules, what needs to be done, and people that just get to paint or draw or model stuff. Of course, each of those paths have different career progressions. That's all very nice, but the one important thing that we also offer to artists is that we offer a lot of time within the working day where people can explore new skills, where people can explore new stuff to do. We call it personal development time, where people can work with office equipment and all the software, everything that's needed really on trying out new concept designs, new shaders, new cool things that might or might not make the way into games potentially, but that's not the purpose. It's just giving people the feeling, hey, I'm being nourished here from an artistic standpoint, and I can try out new things, and that's encouraged by the company actually.
Yeah.
And
yeah, there's a few games businesses, aren't there, Alex, who have different parts of the studio that certainly that some of the bigger organizations who offer things like sculpture and things that are just much more for sort of artistic outlet. Does anyone want to take as a little question just about writing and story side of games development? Has anyone got experience on writing, story development? As Sol, Charlotte or Pete, have you ever recruited for writers or storytellers at your organisations? Charlotte?
I have a little bit of experience with narrative design. Writers tend to be quite interested in that, as it obviously entails, putting a story together, writing the narrative, whether that be the script of the characters, whether that be the path that the character's going to take, who's involved. From a very deep point of view, I don't have a massive amount of obviously information for that person. However, if whoever's asked the question would like me to ask one of our actual designers a bit more information, we'd welcome an email with that question in it, 100%, and I could get a much better answer for you.
Oh, that's great. That's perfect. Thank you. So we were talking a little bit about the perhaps the non-dev role. So just to finish off on that, Pete, we were talking about the things like HR, finance, law. We want to be really open, don't we, to make sure that people know that it's not just about making the game, it's about running the studio, would you say?
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's been an eye-opener for me. You think you have an idea of all of the roles that go into making a game, but you really don't. There's just so many, and operational roles. So yeah, finance, HR, from our point of view, we've got quite a good, well, very good, but quite a small marketing licensing teams as well. And licensing is fascinating. You can imagine, like within the racing genre, when you're working with the Formula One, franchise, you've got to get everything, 100% approved and correct, and everything looks right. And that, from my perspective, it's just really fascinating to try and just get a bit of an insight in terms of what makes a good licensing, assistant, for example. But yeah, from my own experience, I've come from a non-games background, but, I'd like to think I've got transferable skills, that you can apply into the games industry. And, I'm immensely kind of passionate, just trying to learn as much as I can and speak to as many people. For me, that's what makes my job fascinating and enjoyable after all this time. And they're a lot better than that's for sure. So
100%. I think that's a really interesting segue, actually, Pete, into perhaps non-skills, maybe the softer skills that you guys look for in the studios. So making sure that if someone's got a passion for games, and yes, they might have an educational path in mind, what makes them stand out? Sol, do you have a view?
I guess it depends on what it is they're going to be looking for. Like if someone's going to be coming into the industry, obviously passion's a big part of it, and it depends on, I guess, what show, like in terms of art and stuff. We want to see people that are trying to do things that fit into our games. When I get applications for artists that might have not had, a career in video games before and stuff, a big part of it that I want to see is what have they tried doing to make sure that they can cover all the bases of which we're looking for. So, this is the type of tools and stuff that they use. And then in terms of like the non-dev stuff, like we've got people in our studio that are part of the leadership team that have never had anything to do with video games. It's our head of ops, like she's got a background she used to work at like a marketing company, it's like HR and stuff. Her big passion was about people, and that's what we needed. So for us, it wasn't the passion for games, it's obviously the passion they had for what they're going to do with our staff and our people.
So Tiffany, tell me, an absolute passion for games, is that a showstopper?
Certainly a lot of people want to do games because they want to play games. But then again, there are so many roles within games. We have plenty of people, even at Ubisoft, who just don't play games or play very little games. We have a workplace manager who takes care of all of the events and make the place, before we all got stuck at home, made the office so much more fun and so much more lively by organizing like events all around, making sure that the workplace is also suitable if we needed a new desk, if we needed anything repaired. And she doesn't play games. And you know what? She's just as much as part of a team as everybody else. Because she's people focused, she's fun focused.
Absolutely. Alex, I think you said to us about a passion for, or the passion industries, perhaps, passion for music or film. Do you think a passion for games in that sense is one of those industries?
Yeah, definitely. And again, I want to say again, a passion for games is definitely something good to have within this industry. But even if you're not that super passionate about games, it's not a showstopper either. But it makes things easier because most of the people I work with have some sort of love for games or a specific type of game. And there's so many clubs around different types of games, and people just connect to each other more easily. Plus, when you talk about different genres or, I don't know, very famous, important examples of other games, it makes it so much more easier if you know that other people in the round already know what I'm talking about.
Understood.
It's just referencing other examples.
So guys, we've and Alex, I think you'll be interested in these questions. We've got a couple of questions that are really relevant to what we're talking about. So what we were thinking of going on to talk about. One is if university is not an option for someone wanting to pursue a career in games, what should they focus on in terms of gaining suitable qualifications and experience? Alex, as you were just talking there, have you got a quick view, and then we'll go around the panel?
Definitely. If you don't want to study but you still love games and art, this is where my expertise comes from. Do art. And there's many other sources, whether it be it online or books that can help you achieving a certain degree of craft, and show your work. Let other people share their comments and ideas, be open for feedback. And this already helps you into developing some kind of like sense how feedback can help you, how you can improve your art and craft. And there's lots of resources out there that don't require university pass.
Okay. Tiffany, you got a view on that?
Yeah, if you want to be, I'll be sticking to the development side. So if you want to be an artist, a designer, a programmer, QA, there are so many ways that you can start making games right now. And you can get started making your own game in your own spare time and getting that experience without the need for a degree. I can just throw some names. Most of you would have heard of Unity and Unreal. There's Godot Engine, there's GameMaker. GameMaker is especially interesting because you can make an entire game without requiring any kind of programming. So for those of you who don't want to be a programmer, because I know that's often a concern. Like, I want to start making a game, but how do I make a game if I don't know how to do code? And there are definitely tools for that. And all of those tools, those 4 engines I've named, they're all free. You can download them and you can start making games for free. GameMaker doesn't require a particularly powerful PC either, for instance. So even if you just have a small old laptop, you can still do it. You can still make your own games. And once you get that confidence of making a few games or just prototype, it can be daunting to think about making a full game in your spare time. I often recommend young people to, for example, try and recreate a classic game, recreate a platformer like Mario, recreate a Pac-Man, recreate a Bomberman, games that are very simple, arcadey, very simple to make because they have not that many rules. Start with 2D as well, always help, unless you want to be a 3D artist, obviously, but otherwise start with 2D, means that you have less to worry about with the physics, for instance. So yeah, you can definitely get started making a game, and you'll build that portfolio, you'll build that experience, and you'll build those skills. So even if you don't have a degree attached to your CV, you will have that first-hand experience and the skills required, and you will get a job.
I think also, Tiffany, what you've just touched on is doing that at home, and obviously that's where we all are at the moment. So gaining work experience during the pandemic is also something someone's asked about. Charlotte, do you have a view on perhaps what people can do whilst they're stuck at home?
Yeah, I would completely echo the obviously the platforms that Tiffany suggested to try and have a go at. And I think that if you don't necessarily are a bit less technical, even working on your art, physically working on your art, painting, drawing, if it's an art role, if it's a design role, the same, take it down, really just experiment in different ways as well. If you're looking at production as a potential a role for you in the future, maybe try and look at places that you could do maybe some part-time work at, even if it's online, supporting your game jams, whether it's a retail job once we're in a little bit more normality. Anything where you get involved with people, where you can help support a team in any aspect. If production's for you, that is super important. So getting involved with your community would even be a good start on, Discord or anything like that. Just getting really involved, researching all the different options that are out there. And I would suggest, if you have a specific speciality area that you're interested in, have a look at, if it's art, potentially ArtStation, have a look on LinkedIn at your favorite companies, see what some of their developers, some of their staff have been doing, have a little look at what people have been doing. We like you to be nosy, see how they progress to where they are now.
That and really shows the passion.
Yeah, look at those portfolios, and then you know where the bar is, and then that's your sneaky in already.
So just thinking about that sort of starting point in games, Pete, Sal, do you have a sort of recommendation when somebody, Sal, I know you've done quite a lot of uni talks. What's that starting point for people in games, especially if we're not focusing necessarily on going to university?
University is always a great start because it gives you, I guess, people to lean on for stuff, in terms of resources and knowledge. But there's definitely other ways you can get into the industry. There's open universities and stuff like that you can look at. And there's qualifications that you can do outside, like your Prince 2 for project management and stuff. A lot of project managers now probably come from outside of the industry or worked in, slightly different roles and gone into that after learning stuff like that. So there's plenty of stuff that you could look into.
And that, again, that's interesting. I think there are definitely apprenticeships. I think that's something that, Charlotte, you mentioned earlier. There's further education courses as well. So it isn't all about higher education. And I do think that there's things that we want people to consider as their route in. Okay, so this is quite an interesting last point. I'm just going to check on the time. Yeah, I think we'll probably have to make this our last question. Is it hard to keep work and family life in balance when working in the games industry? It's certainly another one of those perhaps perceptions of the industry. Alex, as one of our veterans?
I gotta say, yes. And I know this is going to cause a hard resonance, I guess. there's this ghost within the games industry, crunch time, where some companies expect people to work forever without vacations, day and night. In my opinion, this is actually, testifies that you failed your product management or how to plan properly. We encourage people to take vacation. We encourage people to have a proper work-life balance, to spend time with their kids, their families, with their hobbies, anything that's outside work, because you need to have this refreshed brain. And even more so during pandemics. So sometimes we slip and we need to get some work done. Yes, I'm not going to lie, but it's definitely not the norm. And we put a lot of attention to keep our break times.
Yeah, I would say nowadays more and more companies, and Charlotte mentioned it about Electric Square. It's the same for us at Ubisoft, where we put well-being and flexibility and adaptability at the heart of everything we do. We've allowed people to kind of have different car hours. We've been so much more lenient on working hours at the moment, because we understand that working from home, having to homeschool your children is a real challenge. And in terms of checking out, we're highly encouraged to check out. If I do even half an hour overtime because I was into a task and I didn't see time, my lead is going to be at me on Teams and say, hey, make sure that you get that time back. Make sure that you don't leave that half an hour overtime at the end of your week. They really encourage us to take holidays, because a lot of people there's nowhere to go at the moment. People have been reluctant to take holidays. So I think there's a real effort across the industry to put well-being first and people first.
I think it's definitely something that's been a real focus, and in particular, obviously during the pandemic. I'm going to have to wrap us up now. I do hope that today's discussion has given everyone a taste, perhaps, of what a career in games would be like, how they could fit in, hopefully dispelling any myths about it being maybe a place for geeks or typically boys, people who only like maths and science. I do want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, to Tiffany, Alex, Sol, Charlotte and Pete. Thanks to our audience for your questions, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of Interactive Futures. Thank you.